So I've gone through several iterations of this deck since it has come out in English and in Japanese when I was testing it beforehand. You'll see a bunch of those scrolling past here, just a bunch of the different builds that I've tried out. I'll have a section later on where I'll actually go over them in detail, but this is the list that we're going to be actually looking at today, which you'll see here in the corner somewhere. First things first, we'll start off with the starter, which is just going to be Uncanny Burning. That's just the barrel starter, not much to say there. I guess we can leave that there. Then we've got the new grade 1 here from set 4. This is Piquant Miasma. So this just says whenever you ride over it with the new grade 2, you soul charge 2 and you choose a Vanguard and it gets 5k power, which is extremely good because it allows you to have some early game pressure, which we'll get into that in a bit. The grade 2, the new grade 2, Sanguinary Tamer, who I just call Bloody Tamer because I think this is a stupid word and I don't know how to say it very well. So Bloody Tamer here has the same skill whenever he's ridden over by Barrow, any Barrow, right? So including the original Barrow. You soul charge 2, then you can choose a grade 3 or less card from your soul and you may call it out. This is also extremely good because it allows you to toolbox your soul a little bit, and you know, you obviously have a lot of decent targets that you can call out from this, like the Amana and Hardening Insights. Finally, we have the brand new Providence Disorder Baromagnes here, who has just 2 skills. First one says for each copy of Barrow that you have in your soul, that includes the old one, he gets an additional 5k power during your turn. Then he has sort of the same main skill. Whenever he attacks a Vanguard, you counterblast 1, perform all the following according to the number of cards in your soul at that point in time when you were attacked. So even if you put stuff into your soul after the attack, it does not activate the rest of the skill. But it says if you have 10 or more, you draw 1 and get a crit. He no longer gets the 10k that the original used to. 15 or more, you choose your and your opponent's units, however many that you want, put them into soul. Then you choose 2 from your soul and call them out to rear and they get plus 10k. It's not a non-targeted board wipe like this one is, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So obviously resist, you know, if you have something that doesn't let you target, this one fails on that perspective, but this one lets you keep your boosters at the same time. So it has its upsides and its downsides. Then it has this brand new skill that says if you have 20 or more cards in your soul, today in battle that this unit only attacks. If your opponent were to guard from their hand, they must call 3 or more from the same time. So this gives you just a little bit more scaling in a sense than the original one, and just gives you a good guard restrict. So for the grade 3s, all I have here is a copy of Radiance Cal Burn. That is it. No other grade 3s in this specific build. I was originally playing more copies of Barrow in the main deck as not even like Persona rides because you never really saw it often, but just for his first skill to give him the 5k power. But I eventually cut it for what I'll get into in a little bit. But we're playing just here the Radiance Cal Burn. I had a couple of options when it came to Regalia's pieces, because another good option would have been the Twin Cast or maybe even the brand new Union the Sky. I ended up cutting Union the Sky just because of the cost. I just couldn't afford to pay that cost at any point in time in the game, essentially. So that was gone. So it was really just down to these 2, but I might eventually come back to this. The really good thing about Protection Twin Cast is that they're both literally the exact opposites of each other, whereas like this is literally just for shield value, this is literally just for aggression, right? So offense or defense. I went with the more offensive approach. Twin Cast lets you guard from hand. It's really good in the early games if you get it, right? Because then one of the downfalls of Barrow is just getting rushed early, or just getting rushed at all, or even attacked in the early game. So this helps you with that a lot, and you can use it twice, which is also really good, right? So you can use it once for its effect, and you can use its effect and drop on another attack. But I ended up going here with the Radiance Cal Burn that just says you can do one of the 2, either draw 2 cards or put this to soul and counter charge. I went with this ultimately because I think it's just better for the game plan. Screw being defensive, we really don't have the luxury as a Barrow player to have any sort of defensive plays for the most part. So being able to draw 2 cards, obviously good, right? It gives you cards in hand, which you can then use to extend to get more soul, and this also generates soul while giving you counter charge, so it allows you to have a lot more flexibility in terms of like the early game if you're able to guard some attacks, stay on low damage while still having the counter blast to do what you need, right? So very good card. For the grade 2s, we have a good chunky amount of them here. We have here 4 copies of the Hardening Insight. This is a card from set 2, one of the best cards that Barrow has gotten. Ironically, better than even the new Barrow himself in terms of an upgrade. So I did somewhat of a video on this where this is sort of a combination of the Curtis and also the Lilac Lasher that we had to an extent. But so what this does is that on place, if you have a Barrow, right? So if you're on grade 3 or grade 3 and it's Barrow, you Energy Blast 2. Choose 2 normal units, or up to 2 normal units from your drop, put them on the bottom of your deck in any order and Soul Charge 2. You don't have to put any normal units if you don't want to, but you tend to do that just so you don't deck out. But you don't have to do that, right? So that's what makes this skill really nice, because it's really flexible. Soul Charge 2 is really nice. Then he adds another skill that says that during your turn, if you have 15 or more cards in your soul, or if you happen to Soul Charge 3 or more cards this turn total, right? So a total of 3 cards, not that you Soul Charge 3 specifically in a row, just in general. Throughout the duration of the turn, if you hit 3 cards into your soul by the effect of a soul charge, he gets 15k power, which is really important to remember that. Because you can actually do this on turn 2. The problem with Hardening Insight is that he locks you out of any other energy uses for the deck per se, so this is why you're not seeing Tizark or anything like that here, because of the fact that very often you need to play like 2 of these in a single turn, often 3, sometimes even 4, right? But often you have to play like 3 of them and that's 6 energy. Very often it have to be 2 of them, right? Which is 4 energy, so it makes it kind of hard to use Tizark unless you go second. But he works really well with the, like, I guess, secret spice of the deck here, because like I said, you can get this thing to have 15k attack, making a 25k attacker if you Soul Charge 3 or more cards. So that makes it that on your first swing before the Barrow effect or after the Barrow effect, he's a really good attacker. But he also combos really well with the other grade 2 that I have here, which is 3 copies of the Veldorok Dragon here. So this guy says that when it's displaced on rear, other than the battle phase, you Soul Charge 1, mandatory. Then it says you Counterblast 1, you choose a grade 2 or less with a different card name from this guy from your soul called to rear. Then if your Vanguard is not Bladmire, at the end of the turn, you put the card you called out into soul. So what this does is it does a couple of things. It allows you to obviously Soul Charge, right? It also allows Barrow to have a very good early game, because what you can do is on the high roll percentage is that you can hit something like the Hardening Insight with either the Soul Charge from this or from the Rideline, right? So that allows you to get access to maybe 3 cards that you can maybe put into your soul from these guys, or I guess more specifically this guy when you ride over with this guy, right? So that gives you 3 cards that you can possibly call out. If not, you know, you can maybe just call out this to attack with. And it just gives you an aggressor that you can use on turn 2 to actually push your opponent. Because it's very important that you push your opponent as much as possible in the early game, because you will not last past like turn 5 with a lot of the decks here. So you kind of have to be as aggressive as possible with this deck. Veldorok allows you to do that, because you can of course attack with the Veldorok. Your Bloody Tamer is going to be 15k, which is a pretty good number. Then if you get the high roll and you can call this out, because Veldorok and also the Pikant Miasma Soul Charged 3 times total, this gets 15k. So now you have yourselves these very nice numbers on turn 2, excuse me, where you can have 10, 15, 25, which is very good, allowing you to possibly push your opponent all the way to 3 damage if you're lucky, maybe even 4, which means you basically are guaranteed to win next turn outside of them healing, right? Because about the amount of damage and pressure you can push on the next turn. So Veldorok is just really important for making sure you push your opponent as early as possible, and it also doesn't clog the deck up, because it does give you Soul Charge. And then the fact that you can actually put the card back into Soul is absolutely massive, because for one, when you do this Trine Lane Rush, the thing that happens with Barrow is that your opponent, if they're a good player, are like, all right, fine, I know Barrow needs a counterblast, I'm just going to attack into one of your rears, pass turn, GG's, good luck. But instead what happens here is that card just goes back into Soul, right? So they can still attack to the Veldorok, but you don't have to, you know, make sure you have some counterblast or the Engraver or something like that to be able to get the counterblast for next turn. But a lot of times they're just way more aggressive, where they just have to give you the counterblast, right? That then means that when you ride here the new Barrow, you then have this guy, you can then call him out, and now that you have Barrow, you can actually use his effect to Soul Charge, right? So it doesn't hinder your plays. That's what makes it a little bit better than something like the Ford that does basically the same effect, right? Ford has just about the same effect, except Ford can give itself 5k, so it's a little bit more aggressive, you'd think, and it could also give you the option to retire a unit if you wanted to, but it keeps the card on board, which sometimes maybe you don't want that, right? So Belderock, very good. There's also a lot of other targets in the deck that you can call out. For example, we're playing here 3 copies of the Selfish Engraver, another good Belderock target. On hit, she soul charges 1. Then at the end of the battle, she attacks if you have 10 or more cards in your soul. She goes to soul and she countercharges. The first skill is only on hit. The second skill happens whenever you have 10 or more cards, whether or not you hit. So this is a good card to call out with Belderock because you can go ahead and threaten your opponent with it, force the guard because everyone knows what Selfish Engraver does and knows the on hit, so they try to guard this, and then they have to deal with your Vanguard's 15k, and then she just goes to soul, which you can call her out next turn if you want to, so it keeps her safe and sound. We play here 3 copies of the brand new Momentary Stillness Shuren here. This is a great card to an extent. For a Barrow, it could be a lot better, but what she does is that when she's placed from hand, only from hand, that's what makes this card kind of obnoxious. If she could be played from soul or something, then she wouldn't be so bad, but the fact that she's only placed from hand kind of sucks. But she says you either reveal a Barrow from your ride deck, or if your Vanguard is already Barrow, you can choose a card from your drop, put it to soul. Then if your Vanguard was Barrow, you can have her get 5k. So that's a little decent. She gets 15k. It's only on turn 3, which kind of sucks. If it was on turn 2, that'd be kind of lit. But it is indeed not lit, completely unlit. It is dark out here. Then the second skill says that when this goes to soul from rear, by the ability of your Barrow specifically, you draw a card. Mandatorily, you draw a card. So this actually lets you draw cards. Sounds great on paper, but it's not as great as it sounds because, again, you sometimes don't want to play this on turn 2, sometimes you do. It works good with the Belderock because it allows you to put stuff into soul. It especially works well with stuff like ponies and just your discard for ride, so you can actually use those cards later on. It also really helps you if you play main deck Barrows. You can put those into soul as well, but again, the fact that it's only placed from hand kind of does suck. So once she goes into your soul, it's a dead card. There's nothing you can do with it unless you call it out, pray your opponent doesn't kill you or kill her, and then next turn you can draw a card, which is kind of ridiculous. The drawing card is nice, but it does, slow down your aggression a little bit, because instead of calling out something like a Hardening Insight, maybe to attack with, you would then have to instead call her, who's a lot weaker, or you'd have to put her in the back row, which is often what happens. You just have a full board of grade 2s just to figure things out, and she's just kind of there. She doesn't boost, so your columns are not as good as they could be. But otherwise, she's a pretty good card. She just really allows you to just get stuff from drop into your soul, specifically stuff that you discarded for ride. Then we have here 2 copies of the Lilac Lasher. Lilac Lasher just has, if you have Barrow, this gets 2 or more. If you have Barrow, this gets 2k for every card in your soul. So this just becomes a huge, giant monster that can just whack your opponent, right? For a lot of damage. This is one of the few cards that I have in the deck that does not generate soul in any way, shape, or form. But I was originally no longer playing this because I was following somewhat in suit with like the Japanese list that I was studying at the time, where they kind of figured out that the Hardening Insight hits almost the same amount of power as Lilac Lasher, not exactly, but almost, where it doesn't make a huge difference to play it, and it actually generates soul. So I tried cutting it as well, and it was okay, but I needed the finishing power, and also a list that I saw, which I'll get into later, made me try this out, and it's been working out really well, especially again with the Shuren, right here, who allows you to then discard this and put this to soul. So you can pull it out, smack your opponent for 60k, and then they kind of have to just deal with that. So. Then I have a one-of of Crimson Expeller from set 2 of Overdress. So this card says that when this attacks a Vanguard specifically, you mandatorily soul charge 1. This is another good target for Belderock because you can call this out, swing, soul charge 1, put it back into soul, and you can activate its in soul effect. Alright, or call it out next turn if you want to get something else to soul charge again when it's attack, right? But it has an in soul effect that says you can counterblast 1, put this into drop to soul charge 1, then your Vanguard gets 10k power. So I'm not playing any main deck Barrow, so it's kind of hard for him to get the power. Not really, because we'll go over the grade 1s, to hit the power threshold that he can, but this helps you out in that sense, where you can use this in soul to do that whenever you have the extra counterblast, right? You don't often use this skill, but when it's available to you, you can use that for your kill turn when you have, 20 soul, and you want to just finish off your opponent with a big barrel swing, or at least reduce their hand by a lot with this, right? So pretty good. It's very useful in the early game, especially because, it's actually a grade 2 that you can actually do something with, right? A lot of your other grade 2s and grade 1s and stuff are kind of locked to your grade 3 turn to an extent. For example, like the Cutting Sword Dance Quagra here, who's a card I've had in the deck since it's been released, right? So this guy says, when this is placed, if you have 7 or more cards in your soul, you counterblast 1, discard 1, choose a card from your soul, add to your hand, soul charge 1. I've talked a lot about this card. It's okay. Then it says, if you have 13 or more cards, you give your front row 5k power. So the 7 or more is like easier to do now because your Rideline natively gives you 7 cards in the soul. So this is kind of nice sometimes if you just need to like get something out from your soul. But typically what you do with this, or I do with this right now, is either one, I have a Mandine active and I got rushed and I have a lot of counterblasts. So I use this on my first grade 3 turn to pull something out to then hit the 15 soul or whatever it is that I'm trying to get. Or 2, I use it when I know I can't finish my opponent off, so I'll call this out from soul, get a PG to survive next turn. And that's really all he really does, right? For the grade 1s, we have here 4 copies of the infamous Swirler, Brainwash Swirler. So this has 2 effects when this is placed on rear, soul charge 1. Then it says that if you soul charge, if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, he gets 5k power for every card you soul charge. So this is Swirler, who just gets really huge, right? Because every time you soul charge, he just goes huge, Effecto Hasto, soul charge, power +2, right? So the good thing about Swirler is that obviously he helps Barrow make up for usually the lack of an early game, right? Because he allows you to have these massive 100k, 90k, 70k swings on your grade 3 turn to help you catch up in damage. And one of the good things now with the new Barrow is that you can actually keep this Swirler out. So you can have slightly different attack patterns where you can use it to boost in the early game, in the early phases of your grade 3 turn. If you have something like the Engraver and you need her to hit, or you have the Shurin or whatever, or you can then leave it out, just poke your opponent with your smaller swings, and then have the Swirler remain. Use this effect to only target your front row, put them to soul, call 2 things out, and then you can boost, right, with a huge number afterwards, especially after they hit like a defensive or something like that. So then the aggression is on the back swing instead of the front swing as well. You can put this behind Barrow, make Barrow super threatening, right? You can do a lot of things with this. You can call this out with the Velderock. It can soul charge, and then it can go back into soul for you to then call it out again to soul charge again on place, and then it gets the 5k, right? So you don't miss the 5k. You can use it with the Mandine to extend into more soul charges, which, speaking of, we're going to be playing here 3 copies of the Mandine, Direful Doll Mandine. I know I've said a lot about this card. I don't really like playing it because this and this and that, and that still somewhat stands, but I feel like we kind of don't have a choice too much, right? So Mandine has 2 effects. She says if your soul has 10 or more cards, she gets 10k power. Then she says, act once per turn, you can counterblast 1. At the end of the turn, if you were to soul charge, you soul charge 1 extra card, right? So anything that says soul charge specifically, you soul charge 1 extra card on top of it. You can actually use it on turn 1 if you want to, but turn 2 sometimes. And I've had builds where I've done that, where I focused on having this aggressive, crazy turn 2 play, where I try to just soul charge a bunch on turn 2 instead to just overwhelm my opponent and finish them off next turn. This build kind of encapsulates that, but just does it way better. So Mandine obviously allows you to make all your soul charges be extra, right? So it makes all your cards basically count as double. So it makes this 1 Brainwash Swirler count as 2 Brainwash Swirlers, right? So theoretically you would have to play less cards at the expense of having to play a counterblast, right? Which is, really nice, especially when you hit something like the ponies that are into your soul. So that extends all of your plays into having extra cards, so you can ideally play less cards from hand. Also, she has the second skill that allows her to get 10k power, so it makes her a really good booster. Now that we can actually keep boosters on board, like I mentioned before. She also has really good synergy with both the new Barrow as well as the new grade 2 of the Rideline, because the new grade 2 of the Rideline can actually call this out. So you can ride the new Barrow, soul charge 2, and then you can call out in a Mandine, right? from your soul. So you have a lot easier access to Amandine, which is why I don't have to play 4 copies here. The other thing is that with Barrow, she can actually boost Barrow and just stay there behind Barrow the entire time, constantly be an 18k booster, right? Because unlike something with the Swirler that forces you to soul charge every single turn and maybe gives you like 1 or 2 turns of a big swing, this is a consistent 18k booster that you just have to have 10 soul, which you basically achieve immediately. With this deck, and then that can boost Barrow and give him basically the same amount of power as if you had either Persona Ride or 3 copies of him in Soul. So it makes it swing in for 31k, which with 3 or more cards to guard, drive checks, and a crit is, I feel like, a good enough number where it's hard enough for people to have to like guard. A little bit more power would be better if I can hit like 43. Maybe, but at that point, that's already 3 or more cards to guard, right? So it's kind of whatever. But making your opponent like have to deal with this is really nice, so it makes it really good. Often there are situations, right, where I have to go into this world. I just don't see a Amandine, or like this is just a better option because I can make a bigger number and maybe finish it out on that same turn. So that happens, but in general, the Amandine is just really nice to have for that sort of consistent power, right? That you can actually have now that Barrow can actually be boosted in this version. Speaking of boosting, we're playing 3 copies of the Flaming Pony, who doesn't actually boost, but it does boost your soul a little bit, because this says in your soul act, you can bind this card to Soul Charge 2. With a Amandine, it becomes Soul Charge 3. With your Swirlers, it makes them get plus 15k, because this becomes Soul Charge 3. This is really good with your Shurins, because you can discard this for Ride, put it back into your soul, which is really nice. I used to play 4 of these, but then I replaced it with the Crimson Expeller, because they sort of do the same thing, whereas like the Pony is kind of a dead card a lot of times, right? In the early games, you can't really do anything with it. You have no ways to get it into soul other than the Shurin. Other than that, it's just using Barrow's skill, but by the time you use Barrow's skill, you're already at 15 cards in Soul, so you don't really need the Pony at that point, right? So I like something like the Crimson Expeller, which is, it's like a Pony, right? Because it can put itself into drop to Soul Charge 1, works with the Shurin, can put him back in, but it actually has something that you can use, right? You can actually play it from your hand to do something with it, call it from your soul to do something with it, right? So that's why I kind of like Crimson Expeller as just like the 1 of, maybe a 2 of, but I like the Ponies. The Ponies are really good in general just to have in your deck, because they're the only way that you are rewarded for soul charging in Barrow or in this deck specifically, because other than that, you just soul charge your triggers and your units, and majority of your units, they don't do jack shit in your soul, right? They just sit there and it's just like, all right, boss, do your thing, right? Whereas like the Ponies actually have an effect that you can actually use. Other than like Crimson Expeller, right? It's either just stuff you can call out to attack, or a Kagura that you can maybe use to try and get some soul, and that's it. It also gives you a sort of factor of essentially when the chips are down and you have to just kind of gamble. You can gamble on a soul charge. Maybe you don't have enough in hand to hit 15. You hit a Pony, boom, you have just enough, right? So it just gives you that little bit of security. So it just makes your soul charges just a little bit more, which is really nice. It makes them worth more. And also, in general, same thing with the Amandine, makes every card you play to soul charge, it extends it to an extra card, right? So if you hit, if you play, like I was saying, right, you play a Swirler, that's 1 card. Under Amandine, it's basically the effect of 2 Swirlers, right? Whereas like if you get the Pony, it's like the effect of like 3 Swirlers, right? And that's 3 cards just from 1, right? Which is just really good to just get that sort of multiple use or extension or whatever adjectives are hard. The last grade ones I'm playing here is going to be 3 copies of the Go Ahead Makani. I've really liked Makani ever since it's been revealed for Barrow specifically, and I've been putting it in the deck, taking it out, putting it in, taking it out a lot, but I finally stuck with it here. And it's actually a late addition. I took this deck to BCS Philly and I added this in at the end. I took out my main deck Barrows just because I felt like the Amandine column was just enough where I just didn't need to bother with the Barrows, and I added a little bit more soul consistency with this. Is the option between this or like an extra Shurin, an extra PG, spoiler alert, I'm playing 3 PGs, and an extra like either Amandine or Engraver or like a Regalia's piece or something like that, right? But we have here Go Ahead Makani, who has 2 skills, 3 skills. The last one we can't use because we don't have Chaos as our Vanguard. So first things first, he says on place you may soul charge 1. I always I always accentuate, empathize. That's the word. Empathize? No. whatever. I make a big deal of may soul charge because that's very good, because that allows you to have an option to not soul charge, which means you may not deck out, which is really nice. You may not soul charge a trigger that's on the top of your deck, right? So that's kind of really nice. Then it has an additional skills that says if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you can put this into Soul. And that's kind of where it stops for a Barrow player, because then it says you choose a Mechani from your Soul and call it. Choose up to 1 Mechani. We don't have to worry about that, right? We just do the first part where it just says if your Vanguard's grade 3 or greater, you pay the cost to put this into your Soul, and then the effect stops, right? Because that's all that matters, because then that allows you to put a card into your Soul. So like I was saying with the Amandine, where you get 2 swirlers, this is natively 2 swirlers, minus the power, but in terms of how much Soul you gain, right? Because you play it once, you get Soul Charge 1, then you can put it into Soul. That's 2 cards into Soul just from playing 1 card, which is really good. So all of this is just to make sure that you can be as consistent as possible with as little cards as possible, right? That's sort of the main thesis that I've been, when it comes to deck building Barrow for a long time, is to try and get around the fact that we really don't plus at all, and I'm trying to do that with just smart deck choices like that. So as I alluded to earlier, we're only playing here 3 copies of PGs, normal, perfect guards, sentinels. I might bump this up to 4. I'm still working out the kinks a little bit of how I would do that. So this is a sentinel. You can only play 4 of these max in your deck. Cards that have the sentinel effect here. This says whenever you place this in Guardian Circle, you have to discard 1 and you choose one of your units, and it cannot be hit. So it just completely nullifies the attack. But if you happen to have 1 or less cards in your hand when you play this on Guardian Circle, you don't have to discard. So that's good for Barrow, because we technically don't have, a lot of ways to have a lot of cards in hand, so something like this is good. So if I were to play a 4th one of the Sentinel, it would be another one of the normal unit instead of the Elementaria. The reason for that is that in general, Barrow actually has a pretty good matchup to an extent against Stride decks, so you might not need it. But also, the Elementaria often will make you discard until something like Night Rose and Harry become more prevalent, where it's just a Stride meta. Then maybe the Elementaria can come back. But also, you can recycle this with stuff like the Shurin. You can put this into Soul. You can do that with Elementaria because she doesn't target normal units. You can put this into Soul, get it with Korra. But also, you can put it back into your deck with the Hardening Insight. Before, when we were playing, or I should say I was playing, stuff like the Morax, you can then use that to shuffle your deck or put from Soul back into your deck to then draw into it. As of right now, there's no way to shuffle in this build, which kind of sucks. So if we can get a card that allows us to shuffle, so I might maybe end up swapping, I'm more than 100% likely gonna swap out this Regales piece for the new Fire Regales that comes out in set 6, which allows me to either from hand or from drop, just use it to top 5 call something, and then shuffle. So the fact that it extends into something and also lets me shuffle allows me to then put my PGs on the bottom of the deck that I discarded for Ride, and then get them back, right? But that's why we're playing normal unit PGs, because it works for Hardening Insight, and also because we hopefully don't have to discard because we have a low hand size. In general, PGs don't soul charge, which is why we're not playing as many copies of them. Unlike these amazing crits here, the Steam Deviates, you gotta play 4 of these because these allow you to put them into Soul. A lot of decks don't use this effect, where if you boost with this crit, you can put it to Soul, give a unit 2k. But Barrow actually uses this quite often. There are often a lot of times where you just need 1 more card, boom, crit, boost, you got it. We're going to be playing 4 more crits here for a total of 8. And then I got here 4 copies of the Draw Trigger. I was messing around a lot with the fronts. We'll get into that in the letter section when I talk about all the different builds I played. But I was messing around a lot with the effect fronts to get the extra shield value and be more aggressive with my soul charge, so on and so forth. I'll talk about more of that in a little bit. But I ended up just liking the draws a lot more. I didn't feel like the fronts were really doing a lot. The shield didn't really matter because I just did not have enough cards where it actually mattered. Whereas this actually makes a huge difference if I just hit 1 draw, right? Throughout the course of the game. But obviously, if you did the math already, you can realize I'm only playing 3 heals. You can swap this out for one of the draws if you want. I feel like 8 crits is mandatory. If you want to be a baby and heal, if this makes you feel uncomfortable, go ahead and swap that out. But we're playing 3 heals because, of course, the Velderock makes it so that we're often on the aggressive side. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes on the aggressive side. So sometimes these don't go off. I still play them anyways because there are a lot of times where my opponent, blows my back out, and this is my only way to survive. These were originally 4 front triggers, but it didn't really give me enough of I just didn't feel like it actually did anything, whereas like having a heal sometimes actually does come up, right? Then lastly, the last trigger here is going to be the over trigger. We're actually going to be using the blue over trigger here, because I'm actually like somewhat in between over triggers at this point, but I've kind of settled on this one, because the option I was playing before was the yellow over trigger. And the way that I'm seeing it is basically when it comes to the over trigger, right? What I do is that I consider it from every single turn, right? I consider every single portion of when I can check the over trigger. So like in the early game, turn 1, turn 2, is this over trigger any good? Turn 3, is this over trigger any good? And then on my kill turn, is this over trigger any good kind of deal? And I kind of narrowed it down to these, where it's like on every single one of those occasions, hitting these felt the best, right? The other option was this one, where it like felt really good, except for the kill turn. It was like kind of whatever. The kill turn was kind of whatever, so that's why I kind of aren't playing this one. This is a good option too. I would say any of these three is really good. I didn't really like this one as much, the Valnot. In theory, I originally thought this would work out really well, but like I feel like it just doesn't give you enough value. Having one of your units attack again is like okay, but that's kind of the same thing as a crit almost, but it's not really, because you know, right, they can just PG this once, where like this would have to be twice, etc. But at the same time, you don't have like any guard restricts and your numbers are already huge, so this doesn't make a huge difference for me. Drawing one in the early game is nice if you don't have any units, but I have Veldorok, so this might not always happen kind of deal. So that's why I don't play this. Like again, I said the number's already big, so the original Obaria kind of doesn't really do a lot for you, right, in either stage of the game. And then the Nyx, again, because of the Veldorok, I tend to have a full front row. On the barrel swing and stuff like that, I have the full front row, so the Nyx isn't that useful. I was originally messing around with this as like my 4th heal trigger, and only playing 3 heals kind of situation like I am now, but it ended up not being as useful either. Granted, its effect is still good, so I might change my mind later on. Just being able to grab something from damage and add it to your hand is insanely good, but I ended up going with these because I feel like these give you the better overall use case. And for BCS, I ultimately went with the blue over trigger here. So the yellow one just says that if you check this, you draw for each of one of your opponent's open rearguard circles, including their guardian, which means typically this is a draw 3 every single time, right? Because if you use this in the early game, typically your opponent has nothing. You draw from these two, draw 2. And then you draw a 3rd from the natural over trigger effect. If you use barrel skill, it's the same situation. You clear their board, these two, and then draw from the over trigger effect. That's 3 cards, which is really good in barrel, right? And the game typically doesn't last that long where you have to worry about this decking you out. Also, on barrel, if they use anything that's not a PG, this retires every one of their units, including their guardians, right? So if they hard guard without a PG, you can just wipe that out, right? Barrel swings in, hits them with the crit, and then you can give the 100 million to another one of your units, right? Instead of having to give it to Barrel to break through. So it kind of works like an Obaria or something like that, where both units are forced to hit kind of situation. Which was kind of nice, but I ultimately just went with this just because it covers, you know, overall cases where like every single turn, if I can get what I discarded back to my hand, even if it's a trigger, that's good, right? If it's a PG, that's great, right? Giving something a crit, that's pretty good, right? So like in pretty much every case, this worked out pretty okay. All right, so let's just go through a sample play here. Let's draw for our starting hand here. This is looking all right. You basically always want to put back any triggers and PGs that you get, because unfortunately they generally don't generate any soul aside from the soul crit, right? In some matchups where you know you're gonna get rushed hard and it's gonna be kind of rough, and you know you have to take damage later on, which is kind of like every matchup, it's smart to try and keep a trigger. But it's only when I see something like the Hardening Insight and like a bunch of other cards that generate me soul that I'm like, all right, maybe I can hold on to this trigger. But in this case, I'm going to send this back. Let's go ahead and draw 2. We're going to get another Veldorok and a 3rd Veldorok here, which we can at least use for discard. If not, worst case scenario, we can go ahead and soul charge with them, right? So we're going to go ahead and stand up. Vanguard, Uncanny Burning. Let's say we won the die roll here and we go first. We're going to go ahead and draw. For turn, we'll discard one of these Veldoroks, maybe make them think that we're playing Vladimir for a millisecond. Go into our boy, pick up Miasma, generates the energy generator and you counter, and use my little Senka acrylic thingy here. But you're not going to really see much of her. And then pass turn here. you basically always want to take the first damage here, because sometimes your opponent might not give you the damage on turn 2, because that's typically when people are like, oh right, Barrel needs a Cannon Blast to do anything. Maybe I'll try to counter deny here, but unless it's something like a Leanorn or something like that, maybe you try and guard, but typically you want to make sure you get that one Cannon Blast, especially since, you know, I have the Velderock in hand. We'll go through here, we'll draw for turn. We're going to get a crit, which is kind of unfortunate. We're going to actually have to discard the heal here, even though I have 2 Velderocks. I'm not going to use both of them. But I kind of need to hang on to them just to be able to try and Soul Charge, right? We're going to use the skill of a Rideline here, Soul Charging 2 cards, and they get 5k to the Vanguard for this turn. You basically, from turn 1, from your mulligan, from your post-mulligan turn 1, you have to start figuring out how you're going to hit 15 cards by your first grade 3 turn, otherwise the game is basically over. So right now the Rideline is going to give me 7. This gives me 8. This gives me 10. This can go into Soul to give me 11, and this is 12. This is 13, and if I hit Engraver, like the attack hits, I get an additional Soul Charge out of that. But that's still not going to be enough. I think that was 14. So what we'll do here is we'll try and be aggressive. We'll call out the Velderock. Velderock forces us to Soul Charge 1 on place. We don't have the best options here, but we have an okay option, so we'll Counterblast 1, call out the Selfish Engraver here, right? Alternatively, you can maybe try and push a little bit more damage, call this out, right? But just remember, whatever you call out goes back into Soul here, right? We have an Engraver in hand. Having access to this Engraver is fine because we can call her out from the Rideline if we need to. So we can go ahead and swing in here. This is probably going to get blocked here. You can either swing in with the Velderock first or go in with the Bloody Tamer. It's, I think, about the same thing, to be honest. We're going to go ahead and swing in here. This is usually no guard just because of the numbers, and that's typically where you get lucky and maybe hit a crit. But you do not. Here, we're going to put in Selfish Engraver and Soul because we're not playing Vladimir and pass turn here. So like I've said, it depends on the player. If they're smart, they'll counter deny you here, maybe just swing here. But a lot of decks, they're just way too aggressive, right? On turn 2 and the like, where that's not really either an option or just people just don't do that. So I might be able to like intercept or have that get attacked into and then take a damage here. And then they'll possibly just pass turn on that. Maybe I'll get another damage, right? Depending on the deck. We're going to go ahead and draw here. So now this is interesting. So if we do the math, we're going to hit 7, 8, right? So we can go ahead and play this for 10, 11, 12, 13 with his skill, 14 with her skill, 15. So we actually do hit our soul requirement just with what we have on hand, which is nice. The downside is I, of course, have to use my entire hand, and I have to discard this critical trigger here, right? Or I can try and keep the critical trigger or discard the Velderock. In case I hit like a pony or something like that, right? So maybe we'll gamble here. We'll discard the Velderock, go into Providence, Disorder, Baromagnes. We're going to Soul Charge 1 and 2. So we did hit the high roll here. We got really lucky. Where now I can go ahead and use the skill of the grade 2 to call out the Hardening Insight. We're going to EB2. We're going to take these Velderocks so we don't deck out and put them on the bottom of the deck. And then we're going to go ahead and Soul Charge 2 here, right? So now that puts us at 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards in Soul, right? So pretty good. So now we can just start slapping stuff down, right? So we're gonna go ahead and throw down this Hardening Insight. Let's EB2. We can put, it doesn't really matter per se. We can put this on the bottom and then go ahead and Soul Charge 2. We're actually gonna hit the Crimson Exiler, which is our right. It puts us at 11. We're going to play this here. We're going to Soul Charge 1 for 12, and then this is going to be 13. We can pull this back because this will be 14, and then we can go ahead and play this for the 15, right? And we can actually get a little bit spicy if we want to, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 cards. We could be a little bit more aggressive here, uses a Crimson Expeller. We're going to get the counter charge back, so let's say we do that, right? Use Crimson Expeller here, counter blasting 1, discard him, Soul Charging 1. We could have used Assurance to actually put him back into Soul. That would actually be a smarter play, I think, to then play the Assurance and put him right back into Soul Check. You can actually do it again. But this is going to go ahead and get 10k, and then this fella's going to go ahead get 15 from his own skill. He technically gets 5, but it doesn't really matter at this point in time. And then we would just go ahead and swing. Of course, only 1 card in hand here. We'll swing here. This possibly will hit because I always tell my opponents whether or not, you know, I'll hit 15 just because I like being honest, but also it means that they'll probably let it hit, so they'll let me here hit this Soul Charge, which is nice. Swing in for 25, swing here, use the skill Barrow, CB1, draw into a swirler. We're going to put in everything at your soul. We'll probably target their entire board at that point. And I will call out myself a Lilac Lasher, and I will call out here a Hardening Insight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 cards in soul. So what I'll do at this point is I will trigger the skill of Hardening Insight. Or, I mean, I guess I could draw first. I don't really know. You can take a look to see how many triggers you have and PGs and stuff and see if that'll change your decision. But I'll use Sherman first because they both go on standby. So I'll draw first. It was a pony, unfortunately. Then I'll use this guy. It didn't make a difference at all. Sometimes that's just how things are, right? So this will get 15. This gets 10. The things that I called out from Barrow skill will get plus 10. And Barrow is going to go ahead and swing in here, and he's going to have a crit. I'm going to have here 3, ending with 5 cards in hand, unless I hit a draw trigger. So this is just going to be 23, and I'm basically set up next turn to hit 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Yeah, because I have the 2 ponies, so I can use that next turn, and I'll automatically hit 20 soul without having to play anything from my hand here, right? So we'll swing in here. The first drive check, second drive check, crit is kind of nice. More than likely that was either no guarded, depending on how much damage I did aggress on turn 1. Sorry, turn 2 I should say. So I'll either put the power here or what have you. And then we have some pretty nice numbers here because this can swing in for 45 thanks to the trigger, assuming that that's where that went. And then this fella here is going to swing for a massive like 50 flat or something like that. So we chuck out like this was originally before the barrel swing was like trigger to guard, engraver was like a card to guard. This was probably a PG, so that's 2 cards, 3, 4 total if they were going to guard everything, right? This is 2 as well, and this is 2 as well, or this is 3 as well. So we took a lot of cards out of their hand and their entire board. So now hopefully this gets to the point where I can like very easily, like if I need to, take 3 damage on the next turn. And just come back and blow them out after that, right? But I actually have, you know, an okay guarding hand for the most part, depending on how badly I hurt them, right? Depends on the type of deck. Some decks get really hurt really badly from you mollywopping their hand with this, especially if you're going first, and then them losing their board and stuff like that, especially when they try to rush you. And some decks don't, right? So it's kind of hard, like, to just have a good advantage sometimes, right? Barrow's a weird deck, or I should say he's in a weird position where he's like destroys some decks and he just gets bodied by most decks, right? So it's kind of odd, and that doesn't just mean just the good decks, like the meta relevant decks are the ones that stomp on him, but also he stomps on some of them, but not, you know, safely enough where he would be in a good spot. But yeah, and you would kind of just do the same thing next turn, assuming they don't kill your rear guards. You just swing in with them again. You could play down the Swirler. I'd probably play the Amandine here to have a good column here. I could go aggro, play like the Swirler here, Soul Charge, and use my ponies to get the Swirler kind of big. And then, you know, I'll swing, draw 1 here, and then we'll check this kind of deal and have Garter second and all that jazz, right? And that's typically what you want to do, right? So just remember, PGs and crits, generally you have to send them back unless you feel really confident in your hand, or if it's just like an insane matchup that you know you cannot win without that, which I know sounds like every matchup, but you're gonna have to learn the difference. Man 9's okay to keep. You only need 1. Hardening Insight, you want to keep as many as those. Having a Swirler is nice. Makani is what you ideally want. You don't want any ponies. You don't want any Lilac Lashers. You don't want anything that generally goes to soul. Unless you have the Shurin, then you can maybe keep 1 for discard fodder. But ideally, you'd rather not have to worry about that, right? That's that. So when it comes to looking out for the future, we don't really know a lot of like cards that actually be good for Barrow. We have this promo here, which I've been proxying, which looks like this in color here. This is the Opener of Hearts Philia here. This is what has been called Dark Sage Shenring. She just says that if you boost, if your opponent has 1 or less rear guards, or you played an order, she can get 5k, then she goes to soul to draw your card. I hopefully don't have to explain to you why that's insanely good. Works really good with the Velderock as well, but it allows Barrow to actually draw cards. So once this come out, we're playing 4 of these. I haven't figured out how exactly the build is going to work, but you're going to need 4 of these for the future. Then in set 6, this is another proxy that I have. This is Strange Noise of Ruin Aldro. This is what it looks like in color, but this is a front trigger. This is an effect front trigger. We finally got new effect front triggers in set 6. A lot of people don't like these because they don't do anything crazy for their deck specifically, but it does insane things for Barrow specifically, which is why I really like it. So this has 0 attack, but it says when you retire this from Guardian Circle, so when you guard with this, it actually goes to Soul, which is huge because now we have 2 triggers, 8 cards in our trigger lineup that can actually generate Soul. So this is really good. Especially because it allows you to guard in the early game and actually generate Soul from that instead of just losing a card, so on and so forth. So these are really good. We're going to be playing these at 4. Haven't figured out the exact trigger ratio, but I just know that it'll be this at 4. Same thing with the unit ratio. This at 4. We just have to. We don't have a choice, right? These cards are just way too good to not play. But we'll see in the future when they come out. I'll do another video and see how it goes. This one is the one I want to try and test. This is Have a Great Year, which is also in set 6. That's a grade 2 order that says you look at the top 5, choose 1, put it into your soul and shuffle. So this allows you to shuffle, gives us soul. It's an order, so it allows Philly to activate. It allows us to technically deck in, not soul charge. So I'm experimenting with this, but I'll report back on this in the future. Alright, so let's just go over quickly the sort of thought process for the build, how I've gone through it. So this here is the original build that I was originally very early on working on once I got the cards, because I didn't manage to pull too many copies of the new Barrow. And this is just using the new Rideline and still making use of the Curtis here, because Curtis is a card that you can actually still use in the old Barrow because it's actually name locked, right? So unfortunately you can't use this with the new Barrow. Curtis just says on place if you have Barrow Soul Charge too. So I was just using a lot of units that Soul Charge a lot. And this was like, okay, I threw in the Kenny Ludley just cuz. And you're trying to use the Bifrons because I'm not using like an order, so I use that Counterblast to like get Soul and get some cards in hand. So I messed around a lot with this a bit. Then I switched over to this. This was what I was working on the sort of on CFA before the cards came out on paper and they were released in Japan. And this was using this cute little interaction with this card here, Melody of Phoenix Flower Taka, who just says you can rest it, choose a card from your damage zone, put it to your soul, then take the top card of your deck, put it on your damage zone face down. And then if it was a grade 3 that you took from your damage zone, you soul charge 1. So this allows you to like toolbox a lot of different cards, right? So it allows you to grab a pony from your damage zone, it allows you to grab Barrow from your damage zone, you can grab the Morax from your damage zone, so on and so forth. So many cards you can just grab, use your damage zone as like, you know, an extension. So a combination with that and the Shurin, it allows you to like not have to soul charge as much, which is really nice. And I was trying to play into that by playing stuff like Walk the Dark, which is a blitz order that says from your soul you can play this, or from your hand you EB3, and then it's a 15k shield, which is really nice. So you can, if it's in damage, right, you can put it in with this guy. Same thing with this. This is the Haunted Ball that says EB3, choose 2 cards from your drop, put them into your soul, and if you have 10 or more cards, your Vanguard gets 10k power. So that's pretty much always active immediately, right? So it allows Barrow to actually have 10k power, which is really good with the crit and so on, because it doesn't get that by himself. Of course, this build uses up a lot of energy, which makes Hardening Insight kind of hard to use. But it was just based around trying to use the Taika to work as sort of like a Killer Tail, or like more specifically a Yellow Bolt, where I can use it every single turn to get a lot of soul from it. And then using stuff like the Bifrons to go through my deck and try and get like cards to guard with and stuff like that. But this was my favorite build that I worked on, and this is really fun to play around with just because I really like this interaction. I even use this in like Luke here. But so far I haven't found the right deck for this combination of cards. Then I worked with my buddy JJ, Mr. Rogers. He was trying to help me out figure out a build, so many thanks to him. Please check out his channel. He's currently doing basically 25 days of Christmas, but with premium decks, and it's been really good content so far. I have I'm planning on building his Silver Thorns list and his what is it called, his Blau list. I have that in the mail. I have some of it that I got in today. So please go check that out. I'll have the links on screen and everywhere else. But he was helping me out in the Discord trying to see if we can get a build that was working. And this is a sort of more stereotypical builder, I want to say, because it uses the Amandine, it uses the Pandemonium Tactics. We were playing 4 copies of the Morax to sort of take place of the Curtis, because it's kind of the same thing, a grade 3 on play soul charge, right?
And this was working out like okay, but like my hand size was really small, so I didn't really like it too much. So then I tried to squeeze in the Tizark, took out the Amandine, and instead started playing the Pandemonium Tactics. And this list, I played this list for a good while, and I actually kind of like this list. I even tried doing Rainbow right here to try and make use of the fronts as well as the draws, but then eventually I ended up dropping those fronts because of the fact that I just wasn't feeling a lot of value coming in from them. I played the fronts later on. We'll talk about that after the next list that we look at. But I just wasn't getting enough value from it, right? I wasn't playing Velderock here. So whenever I would check it, it wouldn't really matter, because if it was like on my grade 3 turn, my units were already big. So it was kind of like, you know, it's nice, but it wasn't like better than like if I checked the draw or crit, right? Same thing in the early game. I really didn't have anything in the front row, so it's kind of whatever for the most part. The shield value didn't always matter, because it was the kind of thing where like I had such low hand and low shield value where an extra 5k really did not do enough, ironically, right? Sometimes it, you know, people say like, oh yeah, the 5k really helps out. In this case, it just was not enough, right? Where like it just didn't make enough of a difference, which is kind of weird. But I found again a lot of issues here with the Hardening Insight, right? Because oftentimes I would have to play like 2-3 copies of this in a single turn, and if I use Tizark, I can't do that. Tizark is great when you get to use her, because she allows you to actually have cards, especially if you go second. She allows you to have cards in hand. She gives you a good discard target. You can cycle her. You can use her in the late game in theory, but it just does not gel well with Barrow. Then I saw this list here from Tempest or Dragonblade on Twitter, who is another Barrow main that I've been talking with a lot, and they shared this list where they won their locals recently with it, and I talked to them with it and discussed a lot of the different options here. And this list is somewhat similar to what I have now. The like ultimate list that I just showed you guys, it's kind of derived from this list, where I took some of the ideas here, a good amount of the ideas, and sort of combined it a little bit with what I was working with before here. But thank you a lot, you know, Tempest, for discussing with me and sharing a list. But this list here, as you can see, a lot of the inspiration a lot of the inspiration kind of right away here, right, where you can see that I immediately was using stuff like the Crimson Mixpeller that came from this list. Kogra I was already messing around a lot with, but then I cut it out at some point. I was already messing around with, at this point, I was messing around with the Ford. I was actually messing around with 3 Ford and 4 Velderock. So I was going real in on this, but they were actually using the Ford instead. They actually cut down one of their main deck barrels, which I thought was interesting, and they went back to the Amandine here. They were playing sort of rainbow triggers here, no heals, which is interesting. The 3 PGs, which I'd kind of mess around a bit with myself, right? I drew a bit from this list, right? And that's where I came up with this next list that we'll take a look at here, which was like basically the list that we're showing today, right? With just this one small change, right? I tried out the fronts here, tried Rainbow, no heals. I just did not like it, right? Again, sometimes it just really didn't matter. The shield was not enough. The fronts didn't always pop off. And if that was a heal, that would have been actually kind of nice. So I ended up ultimately going with this list, and this is the list that I took to BCS Philly, which we'll maybe have a vlog about pretty soon to see how that went and how my matchups went. And I've been really, really liking this list. For a lot of reasons, right? The Velderock really ties everything together, like I've showed, right? It has a lot of synergy with a lot of these cards here. So things like like I mentioned, the Velderock works really well with Shurin, because you can put stuff into Soul, call it out with Velderock. Works insanely well with the Hardening Insight, right? Just the fact that you can call it out to use attacker, and then it goes back into Soul for you to use later on. Works really well with the Makani, right? So that's the change that I made at the last second from this build. I took out the main deck barrels for Makani, just for a little bit more consistency. Works really well with the Crimson Mixpeller. Works really well with the Hardening Insight. I'm sorry, not Hardening Insight. Selfish Engraver even works well with the Pony, right? Because you can just call Pony out, put it back into Soul for you to then Soul Charge, Soul Blast bind it to then so charge, right? Works really well with even with Swirler, right? It works insanely well with like every single card here, and allows you to get that turn 2 pressure that allows you to then close out the games after that, right? And yeah, that's kind of the thought process of how we got to the build that I have today. If you like any of the other builds that I've showed, you can go ahead and mess around with those, right? I'll try and have them in the description. If you like any of these better, go ahead and mess around with this, but this is ultimately the one that I like the most. Many thanks again to JJ and Tempest for inspiring me and helping me out and discussing with me to ultimately come out with this list. So that'll do it. I really have actually enjoyed this a lot. I was pretty depressed because I wasn't able to, really find a list for Barrel that I actually liked until, I started messing around and getting to the point where I am now. I feel like the deck is actually way better than people give it credit for. Definitely has its shortcomings, and I feel like it'll actually have a chance in the future now. I haven't been optimistic about Barrel in a long time. But in any case, if you have any questions about the list, let me know in the comments down below. Hope you enjoyed the video. Till next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Play Vanguard. Merry Christmas, I guess. And have yourselves a damn good one.